She sat at a table full of people who had already decided who she was, and she let them believe it. That was the part they never understood. Not then, not during the 2 years. She had smiled through dinners that felt like autopsies, not during the months she had absorbed their contempt the way old stone absorbs cold. They thought her silence was weakness. They thought her stillness was ignorance. They built an entire architecture of assumptions around a woman they had never once actually looked at. Tonight, Iris Voss had leaned across the white tablecloth with that particular smile, the one that arrived fully formed and never touched anything behind her eyes, and said clearly enough for every person at the table to hear that it was interesting, really, how pretty could carry a person only so far, and when it ran out, what exactly did Nora bring to the table? Because from where Iris was sitting, all she could see was a drafting job and a Chicago apartment, and Callum could do considerably better than that. The table went quiet. Nora set down her fork. If you want to know what happened next, stay until the end. The morning Nora Ashford met Callum Voss, she was late, soaking wet from an umbrella that had given up somewhere on Michigan Avenue and carrying 2 bags of groceries that were conducting their own slow negotiation with gravity. She did not know his name yet. She did not know what he was. She knew only that when the paper bag finally lost its argument and sent a dozen oranges rolling across the rain-slicked sidewalk on West Huron Street, the man standing outside the black SUV did not laugh. He crouched down in an expensive suit and started collecting them. No hesitation. No performance of reluctant helpfulness. He just dropped to one knee on a wet Chicago sidewalk and picked up her oranges like it was the most natural thing in the world. That was the first thing she noticed about Callum Voss. He did not hesitate. "You have a hole in the bottom," he said, handing the bag back. "I know. You need another bag. I have another bag. It is also ripping." She looked down. He was right. He reached into the back seat of the SUV and came back with a canvas tote printed with the logo of some Italian restaurant on the north side. He held it out. She looked at it. A stranger offering a bag on a stranger street, a man who looked like trouble, in the way that certain men did, something in the jaw, something in the stillness, a scar running pale along his left cheekbone that had not arrived by accident. "I am not going to kidnap you over a bag of oranges," he said. "That is exactly what someone planning to kidnap me over oranges would say." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. The first fracture in stone. "Fair point," he said. "Keep the bag either way." She took it. That was how it started. Not with candlelight or clever maneuvering. With rain and a broken bag and a man who did not think twice about getting his knees wet. Nora had been in Chicago for 2 years by then. 2 years of deliberate, careful construction. She had left Boston with the specific intention of leaving everything Boston meant behind her, and she had done it with the thoroughness of someone who understood that half measures only prolonged things. The apartment on North Lincoln was small. 2 rooms, thin walls, a radiator that announced its feelings about winter in long metallic complaints. She had a job she genuinely liked at a mid-size architecture firm drafting work. mostly occasional client presentations when her supervisor was feeling generous. She paid her own rent. She bought her own groceries. She maintained a bank account that held exactly enough and nothing more. She had left behind a bank account with more zeros than most people encountered in a lifetime. The Ashford name, the Ashford Group, the Ashford holdings across 11 countries and 43 subsidiary companies. The valuation that her family's attorneys updated annually, and that her father, Richard, reviewed with the particular satisfaction of a man who had inherited something significant and made it larger. All of it existed in a different universe now, a universe she had chosen to leave. She had her reasons. She did not owe them to anyone. Her brother Everett had been the only one who came close to understanding. Even he had said at the airport as she was leaving, "You know you cannot actually disappear, Nora. The name follows you." She had proved him almost right. She kept the name because changing it felt like cowardice. But she stripped everything else. No accounts, no cards, no connections that ran back to what the Ashford name actually meant in certain rooms. If someone ran a background check on Nora Ashford in Chicago, they would find an architectural draftwoman with a clean record, a modest income, and no remarkable history. She had her reasons for that, too. She did not owe those to anyone, either. Callum called 3 days after the oranges. She did not know how he got her number and told him so when she picked up. "I asked the building manager," he said. "She is not supposed to give that out. She recognized me." Nora sat with that for a moment. She was not naive. She had grown up around powerful men and understood that power had flavors. Some of it was corporate and laundered, moving through conference rooms and quarterly reports. Some of it was older and rawer and moved differently through a city, through a neighborhood, through a room when a particular man walked into it. The kind that made building managers give out phone numbers without being asked. "That is not reassuring," she said. "I know." She should have hung up. She understood what it meant when certain men got recognized on sight in certain parts of Chicago. She did not hang up. She said, "What do you want?" He said, "To take you to dinner." "You do not know me." "I know you argue with strangers in the rain," he said, "and you still said, 'Thank you for the bag.' That is a very low bar. Most people clear lower." She went to dinner. The first 6 months were careful. That was the only word that fit. Callum was not a man who rushed, and Nora was not a woman who gave herself easily, and their early time together had the particular quality of two people paying close attention. He took her to places that were not showy. A jazz bar in Wicker Park where nobody looked up when they walked in. A diner in Avondale that had been open since 1971. A walk along the lakefront in November that neither of them had dressed warmly enough for. The wind off the water, doing what Chicago wind did, which was make every other city feel like an apology. He told her what he was. Not everything, not at once, but early enough that she could not later claim she had not known. "My family has certain business interests," he said one evening, his voice completely flat in the way voices got when they were reciting something they had recited before. "What kind of interests? The kind that do not get discussed in detail." She held his gaze. "The Voss family. A beat. You know the name? I grew up in places where certain names got said in certain tones. I know what it means when a room goes quiet." He watched her for a long moment, something being assessed, something being weighed. "And I am still here," she said. That was the second thing she noticed about Callum Voss. He never lied to her. He withheld. He was careful. He had walls the size of cathedral ceilings. But he never looked her in the eye and said something that was not true. She could work with walls. It was the lies she could not tolerate. By spring, they were something real. By summer, her colleague Dana had described them as completely and embarrassingly gone on each other, which Nora thought was an overstatement, but did not argue against too hard. He was difficult. She was honest with herself about that. Callum Voss was controlled in public, often unreachable behind some internal wall she could not see over. There were evenings he canceled without explanation. There were mornings he returned looking like he had been somewhere that cost him something. She learned not to ask what she did not want answered. But when he was with her, he was entirely with her. That was the thing. He listened without waiting for his turn. He remembered small things. He showed up when he said he would. He never once made her feel small. After several years of men who had made her feel small in various creative ways, she had almost forgotten that was possible. She had not told him who she was. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment. She told herself it was not relevant. She told herself it would complicate things. The truth was simpler and harder than any of that. She wanted, for the first time in her adult life, to be chosen for herself. Not for the Ashford name, not for what that name represented as an alliance or an access point or a connection worth cultivating. Just for Nora, the woman who argued with strangers in the rain and said thank you for borrowed canvas bags. She knew there would be a reckoning. She chose to let it wait. He proposed on a Tuesday in November in her apartment with a ring that was not showy, just precise. Clean lines, exactly the kind of thing she would have chosen herself. She said yes before he finished the sentence. He laughed. One of the full ones, rare enough that she catalogued them carefully. "You did not let me finish," he said. "You did not need to." He put the ring on her finger, and she looked at it for a long moment and then looked at him. "Your family is going to be a problem. I know. I am telling you that in advance. I know that too." He held her gaze with those dark, level eyes. "And it does not change anything for me." She wanted to believe him. She did believe him. She also knew with the particular knowledge of someone who had grown up inside powerful families and understood exactly how they worked, that loving her was one thing and withstanding his family's sustained opposition was something else. Love was a feeling. Family was an institution. Institutions had inertia. She was right. The first dinner at the Voss estate in Lake Forest arrived with the specific weight of something Nora had been steeling herself for without fully acknowledging she was steeling herself. She sat in the passenger seat of Callum's car and watched the iron gates open in the headlights and felt something tighten in her chest that she recognized immediately. Not fear, recognition. The house was everything she had expected. Sprawling and formal, decorated with the particular brand of wealth that wanted you to feel it before you stepped through the door. Italian marble in the entry, family portraits going back 3 generations along the main hallway, staff moving through the rooms with the practiced invisibility of professional household workers who understood that invisibility was part of the job. She had grown up in a version of this. She recognized every element of it. Margaret Voss was waiting in the sitting room. She was in her mid-60s, still striking, dressed with the careful deliberateness of a woman who understood that appearance was a weapon and had been sharpening hers for decades. She had Callum's dark coloring and none of his stillness. She was all movement, all assessment, her eyes sweeping over Nora with the speed and efficiency of someone taking inventory. So, Margaret said. She did not stand up. "You are the girl." Callum's jaw moved slightly. "Mama, this is Nora. I see her." The eyes did not warm. "Sit down." Nora sat. She smiled. She kept the smile at exactly the right temperature. Not cold enough to read as hostile. Not warm enough to read as desperate. Margaret asked about her work, her background, where she was from. Nora answered everything honestly. The drafting job, the apartment on North Lincoln, the fact that she had grown up on the East Coast without specifying what part or under what circumstances, honest within its limits, offering nothing that was not asked for. Margaret listened with the expression of someone slowly confirming a suspicion. Iris arrived halfway through the appetizers. Callum's younger sister was 31, beautiful in a way that required significant maintenance, and had apparently decided before she entered the room that Nora was not worth the adjustment of her expression. She sat down, looked across the table, and said, "I thought you said she worked in an office." "She does," Callum said. "You can tell," Iris said with a light smile that was as sharp as anything Nora had encountered. Nora picked up her fork and said nothing. Desmond Voss arrived after the main course. Callum's uncle was a wide man with silver hair and the particular settled certainty that came from decades of being the most dangerous presence in whatever room he chose to enter. He sat at the head of the table with the ease of a man occupying a position that had always been his, and he looked at Nora with an expression she recognized immediately. The expression of a man performing arithmetic, adding up what she might cost against what she might provide. "Luca tells me you are originally from out of town," Desmond said. "Callum," Nora said quietly, "is Callum." Desmond looked at her with something that might have been amusement if it had come from a different face. "Your family, what do they do?" "Various things." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up his wine glass and returned to a conversation on his other side, as though Nora had been evaluated, filed, and found insufficient, as though she had already been placed in the folder marked "not a problem worth solving." She got through dinner. She drove home with Callum, her hand in his, saying very little. That night alone, she sat on the edge of her bed and pressed both palms flat against her thighs and breathed. She had survived dinners with senators and cocktail parties with old money that predated the Republic itself. She had sat across from men who moved governments and women who collected corporations the way other people collected opinions. She had never felt smaller than she did in that room tonight. And she had not even done anything wrong. The following months brought more dinners, more events, the slow accumulation of small cruelties that Margaret deployed with the consistency of someone who believed she was performing a necessary service. Iris operated surgically, quick, bright, precise. She complimented Nora's clothes in ways that made the compliments feel like autopsies. She referenced events and places and names that Nora was presumably meant not to recognize, watching with barely concealed satisfaction when Nora stayed quiet. The irony was that Nora had been to most of those places. She knew most of those names. She could have unraveled Iris's entire social architecture in 4 sentences if she had chosen to. She did not choose to. She was playing a different game, one she had not yet fully articulated even to herself. Desmond was the most direct of all of them, in the way that powerful men became direct when they believed they were beyond earshot. At a family gathering in the fall, Nora moved through the hallway outside the library and heard him speaking to someone she did not recognize. His voice came through the partly open door with the flat confidence of a man who had never once considered that the wrong person might be listening. "She has nothing," Desmond said. "No family anyone can identify, no background anyone can verify, a job that pays nothing. She found an opening and she walked through it. That is all this is. And Callum is serious about her," the other voice said. "Callum is serious about everything. That is not the issue. The issue is that I have been trying for 2 years to get him to understand what this family needs from him, and instead he is out there collecting strays." There was a pause. "When it ends," Desmond continued, "and it will end, we will be the ones cleaning it up." Nora stood in the hallway with a glass of water in her hand and her pulse completely steady. She thought about walking into that room. She thought about the specific silence that would fall if she told him what the Ashford name actually controlled, what it would do to his arithmetic. She kept walking. Not yet. She needed to understand the full shape of what she was dealing with first. She needed to know exactly how deep it went before she decided what to do about it. She began that same week pulling documents she had not looked at in years. Corporate records, holding portfolios, ownership structures buried under layers of subsidiary entities. She organized everything into a single file. Then she put it away and waited. What she did not yet know, standing in that hallway, was that she was not merely the target of Desmond's contempt. She was a piece being moved on a board she had not been shown. The contempt was real, but underneath it was something more calculated, something that would take months more to reveal itself fully. She was not the point of the game. She was the leverage. She did not know that yet. She kept waiting. She kept watching. The invitation arrived on actual stationery, which Nora found either charming or ominous, depending on which angle she held it. A handwritten note from Margaret, A family dinner at the estate. A chance for all of us to come together. I hope we can begin moving forward. Nora read it twice. She showed it to Callum. He read it with his face doing nothing at all. "What do you think?" he asked. She thought, this is a trap. She said, "I think we should go." He looked at her. Something in his expression she could not fully read, which was rare. After 2 years, she could read most of his expressions. Something careful there, watchful. "You sure?" he said. "Yes." She went to her desk. She opened the folder. She added 3 documents her family's attorneys had sent at her request the previous month. She reviewed the complete package, once closed it, and placed it in her bag. She was sure. She just was not sure they understood what sure looked like when it belonged to her. The evening arrived with the kind of spring weather Chicago delivered as an afterthought. Gray and damp, the lake pressing its presence into everything. She dressed carefully, not overdressed, not underdressed, exactly right. She put on the ring that had been her grandmother's, a piece she never wore to Voss events because it was too specific, too distinctive, the kind of thing that prompted questions she had not been ready to answer. Tonight she was ready. Callum noticed the ring when she came downstairs. He looked at her face. He said nothing. They drove to Lake Forest in silence, the folder in her bag on her lap. Whatever was waiting behind those gates, she was ready for it. She had always been ready for it. She had simply been deciding whether they deserved to know that. The gates opened the way they always did. Slow, deliberate, the iron parting, like something that had been waiting for this specific evening. Nora watched them through the windshield and felt the folder against her leg through the leather of her bag and said nothing. 3 cars were already in the drive. Iris's white Mercedes, Desmond's town car, a third vehicle she did not recognize, a dark sedan with clean plates, someone new. She noticed Callum notice it too, the slight stillness that moved through him when something did not match his expectations. "Who else is coming?" she asked. "Family dinner," he said, which was not an answer. Callum. He parked, turned off the engine, sat with his hands in his lap looking at the lit-up house. Desmond mentioned Roland Mercer might come by. Roland Mercer. She ran the name against what she knew. Old money, old connections, the kind of man you invited when you wanted credentialed witnesses to something or professional weight behind a conversation you expected to get difficult. "That is not a reconciliation dinner," she said. "No," Callum said. "I do not think it is." She waited for more. He did not give more. That was the edge of the territory he shared with her, right there at the point where his world and her world stopped overlapping. He had always been clear about where that edge was. She had always accepted it. Tonight it sat differently. "Are you going to tell me what you think this actually is?" she said. A long pause, the kind that meant he was choosing between 2 versions of the truth. "I think Desmond wants to create pressure around something," he said. "I do not know exactly what. Around me?" He did not answer, which was its own answer. She picked up her bag. "Then let us go inside," she said. Margaret met them in the entry, wearing deep navy and pearl earrings and the full presentation as though this were a state occasion. She kissed Callum's cheek. She looked at Nora and said, You look well in the specific tone that meant she was cataloging everything. The dress, the shoes, the ring. Especially the ring. Nora watched Margaret's eyes stop on the ring for exactly 1 second longer than they should have. A small flicker of something, not recognition, quite. Alertness. "Thank you," Nora said. "You have outdone yourself with the house." "I always try," Margaret said, and led them in. Roland Mercer was already in the sitting room, settled into a chair with the unhurried quality of a man who had arrived knowing exactly what kind of evening this was. He was in his early 70s, silver-haired, the specific confidence of a man who had never once in his adult life been the least important person in any room he chose to enter. His eyes moved to Nora immediately and stayed there in a way that was not social, not the quick categorization Desmond always performed. Something more methodical, more professional. "This is my wife," Callum said. "Nora," Mrs. Voss Roland said, in the tone of a man who had read a file. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Iris was on the arm of a chair, with something sparkling performing the specific brightness she wore when she was ready for something. Marco, her boyfriend, was absent. Nora noted that. The audience had been curated. Everyone present had been chosen for a reason. Desmond rose when they entered. He said, "Glad you came," in the voice of a man who had expected her to cancel and was mildly surprised she had not. "Of course," Nora said. They moved to the dining room. The table was set with precision. The dinner began with surface conversation, the kind that filled rooms without filling them. Roland asked Nora questions that were framed as curiosity and structured as something else entirely. Where exactly had she grown up? What had her father done? Whether her family had had dealings in the Northeast. Standard questions on their surface, designed below the surface to establish a record. She answered with the same careful truth she had always used. Selective, honest, within its limits, offering nothing that was not asked for. She was aware that the table was watching her answer. She was aware her answers were being measured against some standard she had not been given. She was aware with a clarity that felt almost physical, that this was the setup. Whatever was coming, this was the ground being prepared. Roland leaned forward during the main course and said with the pleasantness of a man who had practiced pleasantness until it was indistinguishable from threat, "I understand your family is originally from the East Coast." "Various parts," Nora said. "We moved around." He cut his meat with precision. "I ask because I know most of the significant families in that region. I have worked in those circles for 40 years, and I do not recognize the Ashford name." The table was very quiet. "It is not a name that requires recognizing," Nora said. "No." His tone remained gentle. "Most names do not, but names that come into contact with families like this one tend to leave traces, and there are no traces of yours that anyone has been able to locate." She let that settle for 2 seconds. "You looked." "Desmond asked me to make some inquiries," Roland said, "as a courtesy. These things are standard when a family is considering long-term arrangements." "The marriage already happened," Callum said. His voice was quiet and flat and extremely dangerous. Roland glanced at him. Yes, which is why the inquiry is somewhat overdue. There was nothing to find, Nora said, because I have lived a private life. Of course, the same gentle tone. But you will understand that in our world, private life and concealed background are difficult to distinguish from each other, especially for a woman with no verifiable family, no financial history that anyone can locate. Callum said Roland's name, just the name, but it moved through the room like something with mass. Roland stopped. Callum set down his fork. He looked at his uncle. What is this? Desmond met his nephew's eyes without flinching. He had the confidence of a man who had prepared for this exact moment. It is a conversation that should have happened before the wedding. This is not a conversation. Call it what you want. He looked at Nora now directly, with the full weight of a man who had decided subtlety was no longer necessary. Who are you? Where do you come from? What is your family? Because we have looked, Nora. We have used every resource available to us. And what we found is nothing. And in my experience, nothing is never nothing. Nothing means something was deliberately put there. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Nora was aware of Callum beside her, the quality of his stillness, the kind that preceded something. She was aware of Iris across the table, with wide eyes and slightly parted lips, the expression of someone who had known this was coming, and was watching the arrival with more satisfaction than she had expected to feel. She was aware of Margaret at the head of the table, hands folded, the composed expression of a woman watching a plan proceed according to schedule. She was aware of her bag on the floor beneath her chair, and she was aware that this was the moment, not the one she had planned. She had planned something different, something chosen on her own terms, in a setting she controlled at a time of her selection. This was the moment that had been constructed for her without her input by people who believed they had her cornered. She looked at Callum's face, and in it she saw something she had never seen before. Not the controlled fury she knew from other moments when his family pushed too far. Not the steady loyalty he wore when he stood beside her. Something rarer, something that looked for just a fraction of a second like uncertainty. That was what they had done. That was the actual target, not her, him. They had built enough of a case, enough ambient doubt, that even Callum, who knew her, was sitting with a fraction of something he had never sat with before. They were going to use this moment against him forever. Feed that fraction until it became something else, unless she did something about it right now. She reached down and picked up her bag. Callum started to say her name. "Give me a moment," she said. She set the bag on the table. She opened it. She removed the folder, the one she had assembled 6 months ago and added to and reviewed and carried here tonight, in the specific hope that she would not need to use it this way. She had wanted to choose the moment. She had wanted it to be hers, not something forced from her by other people's pressure. She set the folder on the table in front of Callum. "I was going to tell you this differently," she said, only to him, even though the entire table was watching. I was going to tell you privately on my own terms when it felt right. Tonight is not that moment, but these people have decided that my silence means guilt." She opened the folder. The first page was a corporate ownership document. The Ashford Group, LLC, registered in Delaware with operating entities across 11 countries. The second page was a subsidiary structure, 43 companies spanning technology infrastructure, luxury real estate, and private equity. The third was a condensed asset summary that her family's attorneys prepared annually for estate planning purposes. She pushed it across to Callum. She watched him look at the first page, then the second. His face went still in the way it went still when his mind was moving very fast. Then he looked up at her. "My name is Nora Ashford," she said. "My father is Richard Ashford. My family has operated the Ashford Group for 3 generations. Our domestic holdings are valued at approximately $9 billion. Our international portfolio brings that figure considerably higher." She paused. "Let it land. Some of the commercial properties your family operates, Desmond, are on Ashford-titled land. I can provide the specific addresses if you would like to compare." The room was completely still. Desmond had gone very still, the kind of stillness that happened when a body was receiving something the mind had not caught up to yet. Roland Mercer's fork was suspended between his plate and his mouth, forgotten there. Iris's expression had simply stopped like a power cut, the performance collapsing to nothing, just her face underneath, confused and suddenly younger looking in a way she never usually permitted. Margaret had not moved. She was looking at Nora with an expression that was too many things at once. Shock, yes, but underneath it, something else. The particular expression of one calculating person encountering another and understanding too late that they had badly misjudged the situation. Callum was still looking at the folder. Nora watched him and felt something move through her chest that she could not name cleanly. Not triumph. Nothing that simple. Something more complicated. The particular ache of a truth that should have been offered sooner, delivered now because it had been forced rather than chosen. "Callum," she said quietly. He looked up. His face had settled back into stillness, but the quality of it was different. Not the controlled blankness he used in professional situations, something more interior. He looked at her the way he looked at things he was genuinely trying to understand with his full attention, without the protective layer of assumption. "Why did you not tell me?" he said. His voice was very quiet, not angry, something more difficult than angry. "Because I wanted you to choose me without knowing," she said. "I wanted to know what I was worth to you when you thought I had nothing." He looked at her for a long time. Around them the table remained in its paralysis. Desmond still processing. Roland still frozen somewhere between courses. Iris somewhere between expressions. Margaret watching her son's face with something that finally looked like something other than calculation. Callum set the folder down. He stood up. "We are leaving," he said. He looked at his uncle. A flat, final look that ended whatever Desmond had been about to say. Then he looked at his mother. Then around the table, once a slow sweep that covered everyone and communicated everything without saying another word. He picked up the folder. He held out his hand to Nora. She took it. They walked out of the dining room, through the entry hall, out the front door, into the cold night air. Gravel under their feet, the lit house behind them. His car was where they had left it. He opened her door. She got in. He went around and got behind the wheel. He did not start the engine immediately. They sat in the dark with the folder on the back seat, and the lights of the house behind them, and the closed gate at the end of the drive. She waited. 9 billion, he said finally, closer to 12 with international. A silence. And you have been living in a 2-room apartment on North Lincoln for 2 years, yes? Another silence longer. He said her name the way he rarely said it, each syllable landing separately, like he was looking at each one. I need you to tell me right now. Was any of it real? She turned to look at him in the dark. All of it, she said. Every single piece. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see the work happening behind his eyes. 2 years being reassembled through a different lens. Every memory tested against this new information. Every moment examined for fractures. She let him do it. She did not rush it. She owed him that much. Finally, he reached forward and started the engine. The gate at the end of the drive began to open. Behind them, through the rear window, the front door of the estate was open. Desmond stood in it watching them go. His shape was dark against the light from inside, not moving, just watching. The shape of a man who had just been required to update every calculation he had made about this situation, and who was already working out what came next. Nora faced forward. The gate finished opening. Callum pulled through without stopping, without looking back, and drove them into the dark road beyond. She did not know what the morning would bring. She did not know what questions would come with the daylight, what the version of her he had constructed over 2.5 years looked like now that it was being rebuilt from different materials. She did not know whether what was coming would be manageable or something larger and more complicated than either of them had prepared for. What she knew was this: the folder was on the back seat. The name was out. The silence that had cost her more than she had admitted was over. Whatever came next, it was coming with all the cards visible. For the first time in 2.5 years, she was completely, entirely herself. Whatever they were going to do with that, they were going to do together. The apartment felt different that night. Same walls, same radiator conducting its nightly argument with winter. Same narrow kitchen with the light that hummed slightly when you first switched it on. Nothing had changed in the physical structure of the place, but Nora stood in the middle of the living room with her coat still on and felt the difference, the way you felt a change in air pressure. Not visible, not nameable, just present somewhere behind the sternum and at the back of the eyes. Callum had driven her home without speaking, not the comfortable silence they had built over 2.5 years, the kind that required nothing from either of them. The other kind, the kind with weight and temperature. He had parked outside and sat with the engine running for a moment that went on too long before he turned it off. I need tonight, he had said finally. Okay, Not because I am. He stopped, started again more carefully. I just need to think. I know. She had touched his hand once briefly. He had not pulled away, but he had not turned his palm over either. She had gotten out, walked upstairs, and now she stood in her living room in her coat, feeling the particular quality of a silence that had changed its nature entirely. She did not sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and spent 2 hours pulling documents she had not looked at in years, not because she needed them now, but because her hands needed something to do while her mind worked through what the evening had actually been. Not the public part, not the folder, the frozen faces, the moment Callum stood up and took her hand. She had prepared for all of that. What she had not prepared for was the look on his face before she reached into her bag. That fraction of uncertainty. That single, unguarded second when 2.5 years of choosing her had flickered. They had put that there deliberately. That was what she kept returning to. She closed the laptop at 2 in the morning and went to bed and lay in the dark, listening to the city and following her thoughts where they went. Callum had not called. She had not expected him to. She had told him to take the time, and she meant it. But in the space where sleep should have been, her mind kept moving, not toward Callum, but toward Desmond, toward the architecture of the evening, the specific guest list, Roland Mercer positioned as a family friend, the questions structured as curiosity, the witnesses chosen with the precision of a legal proceeding. He had not assembled that dinner in an evening. He had been building toward it. The question was what came after. Her phone buzzed at 4:17 in the morning. She reached for it in the dark. The screen showed Everett. She sat up and answered. "Everett, what happened?" A short silence, the kind that meant he was deciding where to start. "Someone filed a motion in Cook County this morning," he said. "A petition to contest the validity of your marriage on grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation." The room was very quiet. Who filed it? The petition lists Margaret Voss as petitioner, but the attorney who contacted our firm is Greta Harlan at Doyle and Associates. I know that firm, Nora. They do not work for Margaret Voss. They work for people like Desmond Voss when he needs something done through proper channels. She was already moving, already out of bed, already at the desk, one hand finding the lamp. He had the filing prepared before the dinner, she said. The dinner was evidence collection. The investigation, the witnesses, Roland Mercer on the record, asking about your background. All of it went into the supporting documentation for the fraud claim. She pressed both palms flat on the desk surface and breathed. The argument is that you withheld material information about your identity and financial status. During the formation of the marriage, Everett continued, which constitutes misrepresentation under Illinois law. What is the exposure? Her brother was quiet for a moment in the way of a man who had already worked through the answer and did not love it. If it proceeds and they find a sympathetic judge, which in Cook County, with the right introductions, is not impossible, they could seek annulment. And if there is an annulment, the question of the prenuptial becomes complicated because it was signed under. There is no prenuptial. Dead silence. Nora, he offered. I told him we did not need one. She could feel her brother's expression through the phone, the particular configuration of his face when she had done something he understood completely but wished she had not. We were getting married, she said. I was not going to begin it with a legal document about what happened when it ended. Okay. His voice went careful, steady. So, if they succeed in getting the marriage invalidated and there is no prenuptial framework, any assets acquired jointly during the marriage period become subject to. They do not want the assets. The clarity arrived like cold water. They have assets. They do not need mine. She was very still. They want the marriage gone. They do not want Callum's attention divided. They do not want someone in that family who did not come through channels they control. This is not about money. This is about restructuring access. And the fraud claim gives them legal standing to do it, Everett said. And it plants something, she said. Even if it never wins in court, it plants something. It makes Callum sit with a question he would not otherwise have to sit with. Miles was quiet. How long do I have? Doyle's office will expect a response from our counsel within 72 hours before they escalate. Get Greta Hartman. Already sent her the filing number. Nora looked at the window. The city was beginning its gray suggestion of morning at the edges of the sky. 5 a.m. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair, then set it back down. There was nowhere to go yet. There was only the desk, the documents, and the shape of what was coming. Everett, she said. Yeah. Does Callum know? A pause. Not yet, she said. She called him at 7. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he had been awake, which meant he had slept no better than she had. His voice, when he answered, carried the specific flatness of a man who had spent the night doing arithmetic and had not arrived anywhere satisfying. I need to see you, she said. I was going to call you at. Now, Callum, I need you here now. A short silence. Then I will come to you. He was there in 20 minutes. He came through the door, still in yesterday's shirt jacket, gone the look of a man who had spent the night in his own head and had the hollowness behind the eyes that came from that kind of work. He read the room the way he always did when he arrived somewhere, read her face the way he always did when something was wrong. She handed him her phone with the screen showing Everett's most recent message, which contained the case filing number and the name of the attorney at Doyle and Associates. She watched him read it. He went through 3 distinct expressions in the span of 10 seconds. She tracked them the way you tracked weather. First, the reading expression neutral and fast. Then something tightening. Then the flatness. The absolute 0 he put on when something had made him angry enough that he no longer trusted what he might do if he let it move. He handed the phone back. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her for a long moment. My mother's name, he said, not a question. The filing is in her name. The preparation is your uncle's. He said nothing. The dinner was evidence collection, she said. He kept her voice level. She needed him to hear the information clearly without her feelings wrapped around it. He knew you were hiding something because The investigation found gaps in my background. He did not know what the gaps were, so he built the dinner to force me to either confirm concealment through defensiveness or reveal it directly. Either way, he had what he needed for the filing. Callum turned around. His face was something she had not seen before. Not anger. She knew his anger. This was deeper. This was the expression of a man confronting the kind of betrayal that came from inside the architecture of everything he believed about himself, about his family, about where the lines were. He built a legal case against my marriage, Callum said. Using my mother's name, yes. He moved away from the window. He sat down on the couch with the weight of a man whose body had made a decision before his mind caught up. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and pressed both hands over his face and held them there. She waited. She sat across from him and waited. When he lowered his hands, his face looked different. Something more interior, the particular quality of a man recalculating from a starting point he had believed was fixed. There is something else, she said. Before you call anyone, there is something you need to hear from me first. He looked at her. I am sorry, she said, not for hiding who I was from your family. I would do that again. I do not regret understanding what they were before they knew what I was. But I am sorry I hid it from you. You deserve to know, not because it would have changed what we built, but because you were carrying my secrets without knowing you were carrying them. She held his gaze. That was not fair to you. He looked at her for a long time. I know why you did it, he said finally. That does not make it. I know why you did it, he said again, quieter, firmer. And I am not. He stopped. I need to sit with it, but I understand it. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. It does not change what I know about you, the 2 years, what I have seen. That is not something a document changes. She felt something loosen in her chest that she had not fully registered was tight. He stood up. The purpose was back in how he moved that particular quality. She recognized the quality of a man who had processed something and was ready to act. I need to make 2 calls, he said. My attorney first. She nodded. Then Desmond. He said the name with a specific emptiness. He went outside the family's structure to build a legal case against a Voss, against my wife, using my mother's name, without. He stopped. Something moved through his jaw. She knew what came next before he said it. She had arrived at the same place at 4 a.m. and had been waiting for him to get there himself. She had to know, he said slowly. She does not move on something like this without understanding what she is signing. Yes, Nora said. Both of them. He stood in the middle of her living room and breathed through it. She could see the actual work of it, the effort of containing something large enough that containment required the whole body. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face went to 0 in a way that was different from the controlled blankness. This was the 0 of someone receiving information they had expected but hoped would not arrive. He turned the screen toward her, an unknown number. Below it, a text from Desmond's number sent in the same moment. Answer this. You need to hear what was found. Nora looked at the screen, then at Callum. He answered it on speaker, and set the phone on the coffee table between them. A male voice, professional, the voice of someone reading from prepared notes rather than speaking from knowledge. Mr. Voss, I work with Roland Mercer's research group. Mr. Mercer asked me to communicate certain findings directly to you. Say what you have to say, Callum said. Yes. We completed a secondary investigation into Ashford Group Holdings, specifically the international portfolio. In the course of that investigation, we identified a connection between an Ashford Group European investment vehicle and a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. A pause. That Cayman holding company is a silent partner in 3 Voss operational properties. It has been in that position for 7 years. The Ashford Group has been, in effect, a financial stakeholder in Voss operations for 7 years. The arrangement was structured through a subsidiary, 2 levels, removed from any visible Ashford entity, which means that when Ms. Ashford entered into a relationship with Callum Voss, the 2 families were already financially entangled, and that entanglement was not disclosed. The silence that fell over the room was physical. Nora's mind was moving very fast, not with guilt, with something colder. Backward calculation, the Cayman vehicle. She knew it by a different structure, a European acquisition vehicle her father had expanded years ago. She had not been involved in active portfolio management since she left Boston. She had not known about the Voss connection. She had genuinely not known, but the voice on the phone did not know that. And Callum was looking at her, not with the complexity of the morning, not with the work of a man reassembling what he understood. Something more direct. A question that was almost not a question because of how clearly it was sitting on his face. I did not know about the connection, she said immediately, directly, looking at him with everything open. I knew the Cayman vehicle existed. I did not know it had Voss exposure. I have not been involved in active management of my family's portfolio since I left. So your brother knew. The voice on the phone had gone quiet, still present, still listening. She looked at Callum. Everett. She thought about the call at 4 in the morning, the way he had known about the dinner before she told him, the way he had immediately known the attorney's name, the way he had said, "Did you use the documents last night?" Not what happened, not "Are you okay?" Specific and targeted, like a man who already knew the shape of the evening and was confirming a detail. She thought about the 7-year timeline. The Cayman connection was 7 years old. She had been in Chicago for 6 years, which meant her family had already had financial exposure to Voss operations before she ever walked down West Huron Street in the rain with a broken bag and a dozen oranges. She sat with that for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called her brother. He answered on the first ring. "Everett," she said. Her voice came from somewhere very controlled and very cold. The Cayman vehicle. The Voss exposure. Did you know? A silence that lasted 1 second too long. Nora, it was not. He stopped. Started again. It was not what you are thinking. Dad identified the investment opportunity years ago. It was a sound financial decision. and it had nothing to do with. Did you know when I moved to Chicago? Another silence. Did you know when I met Callum? His voice shifted. Careful now. We did not arrange anything. We saw an opportunity, and the returns on the restructured notes were Everett. Her voice had dropped very low, the way very quiet voices got when they were the last thing before something broke. Did our family have prior knowledge of my relationship with Callum Voss before it became something I told you about? The silence that followed was the longest one yet, and in that silence, Nora understood something that reorganized everything. The rain on West Huron, the man who did not hesitate, the relationship that had felt so specifically, so precisely, like the real thing she had always wanted. It reorganized all of it into a shape she had not been given a map for. The silence on the phone lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. She had nothing else to do with her body in that moment except count and breathe and keep her face from doing what it wanted to do. Then Everett said it was not arranged. That is not what I asked. Nora, listen. Yes or no? Another pause, shorter this time. The pause of a man who had run out of room. Dad identified the Voss portfolio exposure 2 years before you moved to Chicago. It was a legitimate investment. The returns were. Everett. Yes or no? Yes. The word came out flat and final. We knew. The room stopped. Callum was watching her face. She could feel it without looking at him. The quality of his attention, the absolute stillness of a man waiting for information that would determine the next sequence of everything. Did anyone in our family, she said, her voice barely getting through the sentence, intact, have contact with anyone in the Voss family before I met Callum? The silence this time was its own answer. There was a meeting, Everett said, in New York, 2 years before you moved to Chicago. Dad and Desmond Voss, about the investment structure, about the properties. A pause. Callum was at that meeting. The phone felt very heavy. He was 29, Everett said, and his voice was trying to be gentle and failing. It was a business meeting. There was no plan. No one arranged what happened between you two. That is not. But they knew who I was, she said. When I met him, your family already knew his name, and his family had been in a room with my father. I do not know what he knew specifically when he saw you on the street. I do not know. Everett, her voice was barely above a register. Did Callum Voss know who I was when he picked up my oranges? She lowered the phone, did not hang up, lowered it and set it face down on the coffee table next to Callum's phone, where the unknown voice from Mercer's research group was presumably still present, still listening. She looked at Callum. He had not moved. He was sitting forward on the couch with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, and he was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him and never wanted to see again. The expression of a man who knew what was coming and had not yet decided what to do about it. Tell me, she said. His jaw moved. He looked at the floor for 1 second, then back at her. I knew the Ashford name, he said, from the New York meeting. I knew your father. I knew the family controlled significant assets. He paused. I did not know you specifically. I did not know what you looked like. I did not know you had moved to Chicago. But when the building manager gave you my number, yes, something moved through his face. Not quite shame. Something more complicated than shame and more painful than either of them could hold on to for long. When she looked me up to get your number, he said, I saw the name. Nora stood up. The movement was automatic, her body making a decision before her mind completed the thought. She stood in the middle of her living room with the morning coming gray and cold through the window, and she felt something move through her chest that she could only describe as structural. The feeling of something fundamental giving way, not collapsing, shifting, the way ground shifted before you understood the full scale of what was underneath it. You knew, she said. I knew the name. You knew the name, and you called anyway. You took me to dinner, you let me believe. She stopped. Her voice was doing something she did not want it to do. She pressed her fingers briefly against her mouth and lowered her hand. I spent 18 months in that house, being treated like I had wandered in from somewhere beneath their consideration. I sat through every dinner and every comment, and every time your mother looked at me like I was something temporary. And I endured all of it because I believed you had chosen me without knowing. That was the thing I was holding on to. That was the only. She stopped again. Nora. He was on his feet. She took one step back, not from fear, from needing space to finish the thought without him in it. Do not come closer. Not right now. He stopped. She breathed in through her nose, slow, the way she had learned to breathe when things required her to remain functional above all else. Did you tell your family who I was? No. Immediate. Certain. Did you tell Desmond? No. Then, why? She looked at him. If you knew I had the resources to end that conversation at any dinner table, any evening, they chose to treat me like nothing. Why did you stay quiet? 2 years, Callum. Why? He held her gaze with something in his face that was completely unguarded in a way that Callum Voss almost never allowed himself to be, because it was not my secret to tell. His voice was low and raw in a way she had almost never heard from him. You had made a choice to live outside of what your name meant. I understood that. I respected it. He looked at her with everything open. And because I needed to know, too, I needed to know who you were without the name. The same thing you needed to know about me. The room was silent. Outside, somewhere below, a car moved through the street. The city doing what it always did, indifferent and constant. Nora looked at her husband, this man with the scar along his jaw, and the impossible family, and the secret he had kept as carefully as she had kept hers, for reasons as complicated and as human as her own. She looked at him and felt the full weight of it settle into her body. Not the clean weight of a single thing, the complicated human weight of two people who had done the same thing to each other for the same reason and arrived at the same place from opposite directions. She might have stayed with that longer, might have found her way through it in the quiet of the apartment, in the particular silence that had always worked between them when words were not enough. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She looked at it. A text from a number she did not recognize, containing a single image attachment. She opened it. It was a photograph of a legal document, not the marriage contestation. She already knew about that one. Something else. A separate filing stamped 40 minutes ago in a different court division. She read the header twice to make sure she was reading it correctly. An injunction application against Ashford Group Domestic Holdings, citing the Cayman vehicle's undisclosed involvement with a family currently under federal investigation for racketeering. She looked up. Callum. Her voice had changed. Something harder now. Something operating on pure function. Your family is under a federal investigation. His face went absolutely still. Since when? I do not know, but someone just used our Cayman connection to tie Ashford assets to it. She was already moving to the desk, already pulling up her email, already reaching for her phone to call Hartman. If that injunction is granted, it freezes our domestic portfolio pending investigation. Every domestic holding, every operating entity. She looked at him. Desmond did not just want the marriage invalidated. He wanted leverage over both of us. This is the leverage. Callum was already on his phone. She heard him say 3 words to whoever answered, short and operational. The voice she recognized from the edges of his world that she had learned not to ask about directly. And then he was moving toward the door. "Where are you going?" she said. "To end this. Callum Desmond has been building this for months. He has resources. He has positioning. He has." His hand was on the door. "This is not about the marriage," he said. "It is not about you. It is about the fact that I have spent 2 years moving this family away from certain operations, and he has been looking for a way to stop me. You were the leverage he found." He looked at her. "This ends today. If you go to that house right now." "I am not going to the house. I am going to see my mother." His voice was final, not angry, final. There was a difference with Callum, and she had learned it. Anger moved. Finality did not. He left. She did not go with him. She stayed and worked because working was what she could control. And Callum going to see Margaret was not something she could control or should try to. She got Greta Hartman on the phone within 8 minutes and spent the next 45 in a call she would later remember as one of the most concentrated conversations of her professional life. Going through the Cayman structure, the federal filing, the marriage contestation, the exposure points, the counter-arguments. Hartman was exactly as she remembered her, direct, unimpressed by complications, energized rather than diminished by the kind of multi-front situation that would have sent most attorneys into a defensive posture. "The federal investigation is the priority," Hartman said. "Everything else is theater. If we can demonstrate that the Ashford entity had no knowledge of the racketeering exposure at the time of investment, the injunction fails. The marriage contestation is weak as a legal instrument. Fraud requires demonstrable intent to deceive in exchange for material benefit. There is no evidence of material benefit from the concealment." "They are not trying to win in court," Nora said. "I know. They are trying to make it expensive and visible. Can you file a counter-injunction?" "Already drafting it. I will need everything on the Cayman vehicle, structure timeline, every communication that shows acquisition intent. You will have it by noon." She hung up and called Everett. He answered immediately, waiting. She could hear it in the one syllable of her name. The weariness of a man braced for a call he deserved. "I need the full file on the Cayman structure," she said. "Every document, every communication, everything that shows the Voss exposure was identified after the acquisition, not factored into the investment decision." "Nora, I want to." After she said, "Right now, I need the documents." A brief silence. "You will have them within the hour." She worked. She pulled her own records. She went through 6 years of deliberate separation from her family's financial operations and found the places where that separation had been documented. Emails declining briefings, letters directing communications to Everett, the formal delegation of management authority she had signed when she left Boston. She built a paper trail of genuine distance, of a woman who had walked away from the operational side of the Ashford Group and had the documentation to prove it. She was 90 minutes into it when her phone rang, and the screen showed Margaret Voss. She stared at it for 3 rings. She picked up. Margaret's voice came through without its usual architecture. Not the warmth deployed as weapon, not the conductor's voice managing tempo and direction. Something stripped of all of that. Something underneath the performance. Whatever the performance had always been covering. "I need you to come to the house," Margaret said. "I am working. Callum is here." A pause. "He and Desmond are." Her voice stopped. Nora heard her breathe. "Please come." The word landed differently from this woman than it had ever landed before. Nora was already reaching for her keys. She drove herself. 20 minutes through mid-morning Chicago traffic, with her hands steady on the wheel, and her mind running through what she knew and what she did not know, and what she would need when she arrived. The counter-injunction was filed. The Cayman documentation was in Hartman's hands. The legal architecture was as solid as she could make it in 90 minutes. What came next was not legal. What came next was the kind of thing that happened in rooms between people who had been circling each other for 18 months, and it required a different kind of preparation entirely. The gates were already open when she reached Lake Forest. She drove through without stopping. Parked behind Callum's car and Desmond's town car, and a third vehicle she recognized, now with a clarity she had not had 2 days ago. Federal issue. Dark sedan. 2 men visible in the front seats, neither making any pretense about what they were. Her chest tightened once. Then she got out of the car. The front door was open. She walked in without knocking and followed the sound of voices to the main sitting room. Callum and Desmond were standing 8 feet apart in the specific arrangement of men who had burned through the beginning and middle of an argument and arrived somewhere final. Both of them still in the way of people who had exhausted the kinetic phase and were operating now on something colder and more deliberate. Margaret was in the chair by the window. Her posture was technically perfect. Her face was the worst thing in the room, not because of what it was doing, but because of what it was failing to do. The composure she had maintained across every dinner, every event, every orchestrated gathering was still present structurally. But something beneath it had given way, and the structure was sitting on nothing. Desmond looked at Nora when she entered. His eyes moved over her with the reassessing quality of a man updating a file in real time. Callum turned at the sound of her footsteps. When he saw her, his face did something small and fractional, a loosening just enough that she felt it in her chest. The rest of him remained wire-tight. "You should not have come," he said. "Margaret called me." He looked at his mother. Something passed between them that Nora did not try to read. "What is happening?" she said, to the room, to whoever was going to answer honestly. Desmond answered. "There is a federal matter," he said, with the specific cadence of a man performing calm over something that was not calm. "Certain operational arrangements that have been under scrutiny. This is not new. It has been managed." Nora looked at him directly. "You structured the Cayman exposure deliberately." She said it the way she said things when she was not asking, just stating. "You tied Ashford Holdings to Voss operations, not because the returns justified it. The returns on that vehicle have been marginal for 3 years. You did it because you needed a financial connection to a legitimate family to provide the investigation somewhere else to look." The room was very quiet. Raphael held her gaze. She held his. "And when I appeared in Callum's life," she continued, "you saw the connection made real. An Ashford inside the family was more useful than an Ashford on a document. It deepened the entanglement. It gave you standing." And she stopped as the final piece arrived. "It gave you a way to control Callum, because if his marriage depended on family approval, if my position in this family was always precarious, you could always pull that thread." Callum was very still across the room. "Except it did not work," she said, "because Callum chose me fully, and that meant you had lost the leverage you thought you had built. So you went the legal route and the federal route simultaneously. You put my family's assets in the line of fire to force a choice. Either I withdraw and take the Ashford exposure with me, or I stay, and the federal scrutiny of Voss operations attaches to Ashford Holdings and damages both families." Desmond looked at her for a long moment. "You are considerably smarter than I gave you credit for," he said. "I know." She did not say it with any heat, just as a fact. "That was your first mistake." "What was the second?" he said, not warmly, with the edge of a man who still believed he held something she did not. "Underestimating what I would do to protect my husband." She reached into her bag. She pulled out her phone screen, facing out a document visible on it. She held it so Desmond could see the header clearly. "My attorney filed a counter-injunction 40 minutes ago," she said. "It cites the deliberate structuring of the Cayman vehicle as evidence of conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. It names the parties who created that structure and the timeline of their decisions." She paused. "It also includes documentation of the Cook County marriage contestation as evidence of bad faith legal action designed to coerce a potential federal witness. Because the moment my name appeared in your Cayman filings, I became a potential witness in the federal matter, and filing a fraudulent marriage claim against a potential federal witness is its own category of problem entirely. Something happened in Desmond's face, small and almost imperceptible, a fractional shift, the first crack in the structure of a man who had spent 5 decades being the one who introduced cracks into other people's structures. The federal agents in your driveway were not there when I arrived. 2 days ago, Nora said. They are here now. They were not called for me. She looked at him steadily. Whatever arrangement you believed was still intact. Desmond, it is not. It ended when you put my family's name on your legal filings. You made us adversaries in a federal matter, and adversaries in a federal matter cooperate with investigators. That is simply what they do. The silence in the room was the loudest thing she had heard in a very long time. Callum moved. He crossed the room and came to stand beside her, not in front, not positioning himself as a barrier between her and anything. Beside her, level, shoulder to shoulder. She felt the warmth of him on her left side, and something in her chest that had been braced since 4 in the morning finally released its hold. Desmond looked at his nephew. Whatever he saw in Callum's face provided him the last piece of information he needed to understand the full shape of what had happened. His expression shifted once more, something settling into a kind of stillness that was different from his usual stillness, less controlled, more resigned. He looked at Nora one final time, the look of a man performing a recalculation he had not anticipated needing to perform. Then the 2 federal agents came through the sitting room door. They did not announce themselves with force. They did not need to. They were quiet, professional, carrying the specific neutrality of people who had performed this particular task many times before and understood that the task did not require drama. One of them addressed Desmond by name, asked him to come with them regarding certain financial arrangements and the documentation related to them. Desmond looked at the agents. He looked at Nora. He looked at Callum. He went with them without being asked. He walked out of his brother's sitting room under his own power shoulders, back chin level, maintaining the physical vocabulary of a man who had not been defeated, because maintaining it was the only dignity available to him in this moment. Nora watched him go. She felt nothing particular about it. No satisfaction, no triumph, not yet. Those were feelings for after. Right now, there was only the flatness of a situation resolving. The particular emptiness that followed sustained tension when the tension finally released. The front door closed. Margaret had not moved through any of it. She sat with her back straight and her hands folded, and she was looking at the space where Desmond had been standing with an expression Nora could not read and did not try to. Callum moved to a chair across from his mother and sat down. He was tired in a way that went deeper than the night without sleep, the deeper kind. The tiredness of a man who had been carrying the awareness of a collision for a long time, and now it had come, and the carrying was over, but the aftermath had its own weight. The three of them were alone in the room. Nobody spoke for what felt like a very long time. Then Margaret said, without looking away from the window, "I did not know about the federal investigation." Callum looked at her. "I knew about the legal filing." Her voice was even, not defensive. There was no energy left in it for defense. It was the voice of someone making a record of the truth, because the record was all that was left to make. The marriage contestation. Desmond told me it was necessary. He said she was concealing something that would damage the family. He said. She stopped. Her hands moved slightly in her lap, then stilled. He said a great many things, she said. I believed them because I wanted to believe them. Mama, let me finish. She looked at her son. Her eyes were dry. Whatever was moving through her was internal, unavailable to the surface. I believed them because I had already decided that she was wrong for you, Margaret said, before I knew anything about her, before she walked through that door the first time. I had already decided. She looked at Nora then, because she was not what I had imagined for you. She did not come from the world I understood. I told myself it was about protecting you, and protecting this family, and protecting what we carried. But that was not honest. It was simpler than that. She was not what I chose. And I am a woman who has spent her entire life believing that what she chooses matters. The window light was gray and flat behind her. The room was very still. Nora looked at Margaret Voss. This woman who had made 18 months of her life a sustained exercise in endurance, who had deployed every social instrument available to her with the precision of long practice, who had signed her name to a legal document designed to unmake Nora's marriage. She waited for the anger. She expected it. It did not come the way she expected. What arrived instead was something more tired and more complicated than anger. I know, Nora said. Margaret looked at her. I knew from the first dinner, Nora said. It was never about what I had done. It was about what I was. She held the older woman's gaze without softness and without heat. Both would have been performances, and she was done performing in this house. You had made your decision before you met me. Everything after that was evidence collection. Margaret's jaw moved. Something in her face worked through itself. Yes, she said. The single word of a woman not accustomed to concession, doing it anyway, in front of her son, in the wreckage of a plan that had broken in every direction at once. Callum looked at his mother with both things at once, the love and the accounting of what that love had cost him, neither one canceling the other out. He had always been a man who could hold two contradictory truths without needing to resolve them into something simpler. We need to talk about Desmond, he said. His voice was quiet and carried weight. About what he built and how long it has been in place. About the federal exposure. About what the family does now. I know, Margaret said. For 2 years I have been moving operations away from the arrangements he maintained. He knew, and this was his answer to it. He built a structure that tied the family's legal exposure to external assets, so that any attempt to reform the operation would damage someone else along with it. He looked at Nora. Your family's assets were the ones he chose because of you, because he believed that if the choice was between the family and my wife, he could predict which way I would move. What choice? Margaret said. Between you and Nora, Callum said simply. The window light shifted as something moved across the sky outside. The room breathed. There is no such choice, Nora said. Both of them looked at her. That is the framing he built. That is the trap inside the trap. Force a binary between two things that are not actually opposites. Make every decision appear to cost something. Then stand back and wait for the pressure to do the work. She looked at Callum. He counted on us not being able to see past the frame he constructed. He was wrong about that. Callum held her gaze. But the exposure is real, she continued. The Cayman connection is real. The federal investigation is real. My family's assets are genuinely entangled in it, not by our intent, but by the structure he built around us. Hartman will argue non-knowledge, and she will be right. But that process takes time and visibility that the Ashford Group does not want. She looked at Margaret, then back at Callum. We cooperate with the investigation where it is warranted. We restructure the Cayman vehicle to remove the Voss exposure. We create a documented record of the Ashford Group's distance from the operational aspects of whatever is under scrutiny. We do this together cleanly, and we create a paper trail that makes the cooperation itself the evidence. Margaret was watching her with an expression she had never worn in Nora's presence before. Not warmth, not the performance of warmth. Attention, genuine attention. The particular look of someone engaged in the serious business of revising an assessment they had held with great confidence for a long time. You would do that, Margaret said. You would use your family's resources to clean this. I am already involved, Nora said. He made sure of that. I can fight the involvement, or I can use it. Using it is faster, and it protects everyone, including people who have not particularly earned my protection. She paused. That is not generosity. That is arithmetic. A long silence settled over the room. Not the hostile silence of the dinner table, not the weighted silence of the car on the way home from the estate the night before. Something different, the silence of people in the same room for the first time without a performance running between them. Then Margaret said quietly, and without any of the architecture that usually surrounded her words, I misjudged you. Yes, Nora said. You did. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was two women in the same room, stating facts without the social machinery that had always run between them, and it was more honest than anything that had passed between them in 18 months. The legal process took 4 months. Hartman was exactly as effective as her reputation suggested, methodical where methodology served, aggressive where aggression was warranted, precise in the way that produced results without unnecessary escalation. The Cayman vehicle was restructured within 6 weeks. The Ashford exposure documented as non-operational and non-knowing. The federal investigators, once presented with the full record of how the entanglement had been constructed and by whom redirected their attention toward where it actually belonged. Desmond was indicted in the 8th week. 3 counts. His attorney was very good. It did not change the fundamental arithmetic. The Cook County marriage contestation was withdrawn before it ever reached a hearing. Hartman's counter-filing had done its work with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and understood exactly which pressure applied at which angle produced which result. The bad faith argument was strong enough that proceeding would have made things considerably worse for the parties who had filed it. Nora worked through all of it. She worked the way she had always worked when things required her to remain functional, which was to focus on what was in front of her and let the larger reckoning wait until there was space for it. There was always space eventually. Everett came to Chicago in the 3rd month. She met him at a restaurant in Lincoln Square. Neutral ground, a place that belonged to neither of them and therefore required nothing from either of them. He arrived before her and was sitting at the table when she came in, which was not his usual way. Everett was a man who arrived when it suited him. The fact that he was early told her everything she needed to know about where he was coming into this conversation. She sat down. The waiter came. They ordered without looking at the menus because neither of them was there to eat. "I want to explain," Everett said. "I know you do. The meeting in New York, it was always business. Dad saw the Voss portfolio because the underlying properties were genuinely undervalued, and the restructured notes offered returns that—" "Everett." She looked at her brother, 3 years older. Same quality of attention that ran through the Ashford family like an inherited trait. Same bone structure, same way of going still when he was thinking hard. "I know it started as business," she said. "I know no one planned what happened between me and Callum." She paused. "What I want to know is why you did not tell me after you knew I was with him. You had at minimum a year where you knew about the Cayman exposure, and you knew I was in a relationship with someone connected to it, and you said nothing." Everett looked at the table, then at her. "Because you were happy," he said. "For the first time in years, you had built something real, and you were actually happy in it. And I knew that if I told you about the connection, you would have ended it. Not because it was rational to end it, because you would have looked for the manipulation in everything, even in the parts where there was no manipulation. You would have taken something real and made it into something suspicious, because the ground it started on was not perfectly clean." He looked at her steadily. "I was wrong not to tell you, but that is why." She sat with that. She thought about the morning in her apartment, working backward through 2.5 years of memories, looking for the seam where artifice began. She thought about Callum on one knee on a wet sidewalk, collecting oranges. She thought about every dinner at the estate, every comment, every evening she had endured, because she believed she was protecting something real. She thought about how it had felt when she understood that Callum had known her name, the specific quality of that feeling, the floor dropping. She thought about his face when he said, "I needed to know who you were without the name." The same thing you needed to know about me. You were right about one thing, she said. Everett looked at her. It was real, she said. What we built. It was real in spite of everything around it, not because of it. Not because of the meeting in New York or the Cayman connection or any of the machinery moving underneath. She looked at her brother. It was real because of who he is and who I am, and the specific collision of those two things on a street in the rain. None of the rest of it changes that. Everett was quiet for a moment. I am sorry, he said. I know. Are we? We are family, she said. That does not disappear because you made a bad call. She picked up her water glass. But you do not make decisions about my life on my behalf again. That ends today. He nodded once, the nod of a man accepting terms he had known were coming and believed he deserved. They stayed for nearly 2 hours. They talked about other things, their mother, an estate matter in Connecticut that needed attention, a restructuring in the European portfolio that had nothing to do with anything that had happened in the past 4 months. Normal conversation, family conversation, the kind that continued because families continued even carrying their damage, even working around the gaps. When she left, she felt lighter than she had in months. Not fixed, not resolved in the clean way things were resolved in stories where everyone arrived at a definitive better. Lighter in the specific way of a burden redistributed. Still present, different to carry. Iris came to the apartment on a Tuesday in October. Nora opened the door and found her in the hallway without the full presentation. No careful face, no curated surface. Just Iris, which turned out to be a person Nora had not yet met. She looked younger without the lacquer, smaller. The sharpness was still there in the bone structure, but without everything arranged around it, it was simply a face. A person's face. She was holding an envelope. I wrote it 3 times, Iris said. This is the 3rd version. Nora looked at her. The first 2 were too long. I kept explaining myself, trying to make you understand why I did what I did. She stopped. But you do not need my reasons. My reasons are not your problem. She held out the envelope. Nora took it. I was cruel to you, Iris said. Her voice was steady in the way of something that had been practiced enough times to hold. Not just unkind. Cruel. I told myself it was about the family or about what you were not, but that is. She looked away briefly, then back. I was threatened by you from the beginning, and I could not tell you why, because I did not fully understand it myself. You did not behave the way I expected. You did not perform weakness so I could feel superior to you, and you did not perform strength so I could find something to attack. You just were, and I did not know what to do with that. So I made you smaller so I could understand where you fit. Nora stood in the doorway with the letter in her hand. I do not expect anything from this, Iris said. I am not asking for. She stopped. I just wanted you to have it from me directly, not through Callum, not through anyone else. From me. Okay, Nora said. Iris looked at her. Okay, meaning I heard you. Nora held her gaze. I am not going to tell you it is fine. It is not fine. What you did over 18 months compounded in ways you are not fully aware of, and that I am not going to detail for you today." She paused. "But I believe you mean what you said, and I am not interested in carrying your cruelty around for the rest of my life. That is not something I want to spend myself on." She held up the letter slightly. "I will read this." Iris nodded, something in her face, not relief exactly, but the thing that came before relief when you were not yet certain you had earned it. She left without being shown in. Nora watched her go down the hallway and thought about what it cost to show up at a door without your armor and say the simple, true thing with nothing around it to soften the impact. She thought that it was not nothing. She thought it was not enough either. She thought most things that mattered were both of those at once. Margaret's calls began in the 5th month, to Callum first, which was expected. Then, one evening, Nora's phone showed Margaret's name, and she stood looking at it for a long moment before she answered. "I do not know how to do this," Margaret said. "No preamble, no social machinery. Just those words, the words of a woman in her mid-60s who had operated inside a specific set of rules for her entire life and was standing outside them now with no map for the territory." "I know," Nora said. "I want to." A pause. "I want to try to do it differently. I do not know if I am capable of that. I have been." The pause was longer this time, and in it Nora heard something she had never heard from this woman. Genuine uncertainty, not the performance of humility, the real thing. "I have been the way I am for a very long time," Margaret said. "It is not easily different." "No," Nora said, "it is not. But I would like to try." She was standing at her kitchen window, looking out at the street below. The city going about its evening business the way the city always did. Indifferent, continuous moving at its own pace, regardless of what happened in particular rooms between particular people. "Then try," Nora said. Not warmly, not closed. The specific, honest distance between those two things, which was the only place she could stand, where the wound was real and the door was being offered anyway. They talked for 20 minutes. They talked about Callum, the fixed point around which everything else had to organize. They talked about what the family looked like going forward, about the restructuring Callum was undertaking, about what the organization could become without the arrangements Desmond had maintained. They talked carefully and without pretense, and it was not a reconciliation. It was the first step in the direction of one, which was different and harder and more honest than reconciliation performed too early. When she hung up, she sat at the kitchen table for a while. She thought about what she had wanted when she left Boston 6 years ago. She had wanted to be chosen. She had wanted to know what she was worth to the world when the name was removed and only the person remained. She had gotten that answer, and it had cost more than she had anticipated, and the cost had not landed evenly. Some of it had landed on people who had not chosen to pay it. That was the part she sat with the longest. Not the cruelty she had absorbed, not the legal machinery, not the months of sustained pressure from multiple directions. The part she sat with was simpler and harder than any of that. She had kept a secret that was also Callum's to know. She had made a decision about his information and called it hers to make. She had been right in the end about what it protected about the family, about the shape of the world she was entering. She had been right, and it had still cost him something he had not agreed to pay. That was the thing about being right. It did not make the cost disappear. She heard his key in the door and looked up, and Callum was there, coat still on the tiredness that had been in him for months, carrying a different quality tonight. Lighter. She could see it in his shoulders before he said anything. Hartman called, he said. Final sign-off on the restructuring. Federal inquiry is closed on the Ashford side. He came into the kitchen and set his keys on the counter and looked at her across the space between them. It is done, he said. She breathed. The particular breath that came when something you had been bracing against for months finally stepped back. Not a gasp, just a long, slow release. The body doing its accounting. Okay, she said. He sat down across from her, not immediately reaching for her. They had spent the last months doing a quiet recalibration, finding their way back through the layers that the night of the folder and the morning of the phone calls had altered. It was not broken. It had never been broken. But honesty at that depth left marks, and they had been careful with each other's marks. He looked at her across the kitchen table. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask if you could go back. The first dinner, the first time you walked into that house, would you have stayed quiet? She thought about it. She gave it the weight it deserved. Yes, she said. I would have stayed quiet about who I was to your family. That was mine to keep, and I do not regret keeping it. She held his gaze. But about who I was to you, about the name, about the fact that you already knew it? No. I would have put that on the table before it got used against us. He nodded slowly. And if I had told you, he said, that first night in the car before you went upstairs, if I had said I knew your name from the meeting in New York, what would you have done? Honestly. Yes. She looked at him. This man she had chosen, and who had chosen her, who had kept her secret as carefully as she had kept his, for reasons as complicated and as human as her own. I do not know, she said. I might have walked away. She paused, and I would have been wrong. So maybe we both made the calls we needed to make to get here, he said. Maybe. She said it without flinching. That does not clean it up. No, he said. It does not. They sat with that, the kitchen quiet around them, the radiator in the corner doing its familiar work, the city outside at its evening register, the ordinary texture of a life they had built and defended and were continuing to build in the space that remained. He reached across the table and turned his hand palm up. She put hers in it. His hand closed around hers, not tight, not performing anything, just present, the specific warmth of it, the specific fact of it. 3 months later, the Ashford Voss Foundation held its first public event, a fundraiser for the 3 programs they had launched quietly the previous spring. Educational support for children in the neighborhoods where Nora had spent 6 years building her deliberate, ordinary life. Legal aid for families caught inside systems too large and too complicated to navigate without help. Vocational development for young people aging out of the foster system with nowhere particular to go. They had not attached their names to it publicly. That had been Nora's condition. Callum had agreed before she finished the sentence. The work was the point. The visibility was not. Margaret was there. She was there not as conductor of a social occasion, but as a woman in her mid-60s, at a fundraiser, standing in a room with people she had not arranged, wearing something quieter than her usual presentation. She had brought a check. She had not announced it. She had simply given it to the event coordinator and stood near the window with a glass of water and watched the room with the expression of someone learning to see a place they had been looking at differently for a very long time. Nora found her there during a quiet moment between program presentations. They stood next to each other at the window for a while without speaking. The city below, going about its evening. Then Margaret said without preamble, without any of the instruments she usually deployed, "These are good programs." "Yes," Nora said. "You built them. We built them." Margaret looked at her. Nora looked back. Not warmly, not coldly, from the honest place between. Then Margaret said something Nora had not expected and would not forget. She said, "I thought that what this family needed was someone who already understood it, someone who came from the same architecture, the same way of moving through a room, the same vocabulary of power. I thought that was what protected us." She paused. I was wrong about what protection meant. Nora said nothing. Some things did not need a response. Some things just needed to be said and then allowed to exist in the air between people, doing whatever work they were going to do in their own time. Later that evening, the room full and the presentations finished, Nora stood near the back and watched Callum across the space between them. He was talking to one of the program directors, his full attention on what she was saying. The same quality of listening she had noticed on a wet sidewalk 2.5 years ago. The same man, older now in small, interior ways, shaped by what the last year had put through him, but the same man underneath all of it. He looked up and found her across the room. She thought about what her mother had told her once, years ago, before she understood what the Ashford name actually meant in certain rooms. Power is not something you perform, her mother had said. It is something you choose to reveal. The performance is for people who need to be impressed. The revelation is for people who need to be corrected. She had not thought about that in a long time. She thought about it now and understood it differently than she had when she first heard it. It was not about the folder on the table. It was not about the counter-injunction or the Cayman documentation or the moment Desmond walked out with the federal agents. It was about the 6 years of choosing to live as herself without the name and the year of choosing to defend the life she had built without apology and the months of choosing to stay in the same room with people who had hurt her and work towards something that did not require anyone to have been perfect. The revelation was not always a document. Sometimes it was just presence, continuous, unglamorous, showing up again in the morning and doing the next thing. Callum crossed the room toward her. She watched him come and felt something settle in her chest that she recognized as the particular quality of a life that had been earned rather than inherited. Not clean, not simple, not the version she had imagined when she arrived in Chicago 6 years ago, with her deliberate, ordinary existence arranged carefully around her. Something better than the version she had imagined. More honest, more durable. He reached her and stood beside her, looking out at the room. "Good night," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is." Outside, the city did what it always did. The lake pressed dark against the eastern edge of everything, the water moving against the shore in the November cold, indifferent to what had been survived or decided or rebuilt in the rooms of the city along its edge. The water moved the way it always had and always would, on its own terms, at its own pace, permanent in its own way. And Nora Ashford stood in the life she had built with her whole self, finally visible in it, her husband beside her, the work in front of her, and let the quiet be exactly what it was.